All right, now let's go through exam 4, the study guide. Exam 4 is going to cover chapters 22 through 25. So it's going to be the fungi, the parasites, and the viruses. It's going to be 50 questions, all multiple choice. And we're going to go through all the material that you're going to see on the exam right now. So let's get started. Okay, the first question here is the ability of a fungus to grow as a yeast or a mold is called what? Well, remember, this is called dimorphism, when it's able to take either the form of a mold or a yeast. And remember, this is going to be based on the temperature of the environment. So at environmental temperatures, the fungus will grow at a mold. And at body temperature, a dimorphic fungus will grow as a yeast. Okay, how do most fungi enter the body? This is going to be through inhalation or through some break in the skin. So most fungi are going to enter the body through respiratory and cutaneous routes. All right, which pathogens does your book consider to be the true fungal pathogens? So we're going on your book's definition of a dimorphic true fungal pathogen. That is, it's able to cause disease in a healthy adult. And it's going to be these 4 guys right here: Histoplasma capsulatum, Coccidioides immitis, Blastomyces dermatitis, and Paracoccidioides brasiliensis. Okay, I want you to know where Paracoccidioides is found. And remember that it's going to be endemic to regions of Central and South America. What are dermatophytoses? You might remember that these are going to be fungal infections of the skin, hair, and nails. These are also called tinnias or ringworm, okay? And they can be very time-consuming to eradicate completely. I want you to know the different tinnias, the different ringworm infections here. So, for example, I want you to be able to tell me that ringworm of the scalp is called tinea capitis. Ringworm of the foot is called tinea pedis. Okay, so just know which term goes with which body region. What is the causative agent of oral thrush? You may remember that thrush is a yeast infection, and so the causative agent here is going to be a yeast, the yeast Candida albicans. Which opportunist is the most frequent cause of life-threatening pneumonia in AIDS patients? I want you to know that this is Pneumocystis jirovecii. Now, how is Pneumocystis pneumonia treated? This is going to be one of those severe fungal infections, but it's going to be one that we do not treat with amphotericin B. So this is kind of the odd guy out. Okay, instead we treat it with sulfonamides. And the reason for this is because Pneumocystis uses cholesterol instead of ergosterol in its cell wall. And amphotericin B and the other antifungal drugs target ergosterol. All right, which organism commonly contaminates grains, corn, and peanuts and produces a toxin called aflatoxin? You may recall that this is the fungal species Aspergillus flavus. What conditions are likely to predispose patients to fungal infections? Well, remember, pretty much anything that causes immune compromise is going to predispose someone to getting a fungal infection. So this is going to be things like cancer, other infections, serious infections like tuberculosis, of course, AIDS. Malnutrition can also predispose one to fungal infections, and of course other conditions like poorly controlled diabetes. All right, know the characteristics of Cryptococcus neoformans. What do I want you to know about Cryptococcus? Well, it's a yeast. It has a prominent capsule. It's going to usually enter the body through inhalation. It's found in the soil, especially soil that's high in nitrogen content from pigeon droppings. And it's primarily going to infect patients with AIDS, cancer, and diabetes. Remember that Cryptococcus is not a normal member of the human microbiome. Big hint for the test there. All right, which organism or organisms can cause infection when they enter nasal passages while swimming? Well, I want you to know one of the brain-eating amoebas, and that one is Naegleria fowleri. True or false? Trichomoniasis is an STD. This is true. The causative agent of trichomoniasis, Trichomonas vaginalis, is transmitted sexually. True or false? Toxoplasma gondii cannot cross the placenta. Well, remember, this is false. Toxoplasma, the causative agent of toxoplasmosis, does cross the placenta and can cause devastating birth defects in the fetus when it does. Remember also that the cat is the definitive host for Toxoplasma gondii, and it releases toxoplasma in its feces. And this is the reason why pregnant women are told not to clean the cat litter box or come into contact or potential contact with cat feces while they are pregnant. I want you to know the symptoms of giardiasis. So this is going to be abdominal pain, diarrhea, flatulence. You need to know the causative agent of African sleeping sickness. Remember, this is Trypanosoma brucei. How is Chagas disease transmitted? Well, remember, it's going to be transmitted through the kissing or the Reduvier bug. And what happens is the bug bites the person, and it also defecates near the bite. And when the person goes to scratch the bite, they rub the feces into the wound, and that's how the parasite gets into the body. What are the symptoms of cryptosporidiosis? So the symptoms here are going to be headache, sweating, vomiting, severe abdominal cramping, and diarrhea. Remember that Cryptosporidium is an intestinal parasite. It infects the small intestine. Which cell type does the Plasmodium merozoite invade? Well, recall that Plasmodium merozoites invade the red blood cells. The sporozoites invade the liver, the hepatocytes. I want you to know the causative agents of malaria. So this is going to include Plasmodium falciparum, Plasmodium vivax, Plasmodium ovale, Plasmodium knowlesi, and Plasmodium malariae. Okay, know the characteristics of Ascaris lumbricoides. Well, you may recall that Ascaris lumbricoides is an intestinal roundworm, and we get it by ingesting the eggs in food. Now, when we ingest the eggs, they hatch into a larval stage in the intestine, and from there, they're going to penetrate into lymphatics and the capillaries around the intestine and travel to the lungs. From the lungs, they're going to migrate to the pharynx or the throat. They're going to get swallowed down into the stomach and return to the intestines to mature. and it's there that they mate, and the adult female lays her eggs, which then get passed in the feces. So for Ascaris lumbricoides, I would be very familiar with its life cycle, and remember that it is an intestinal roundworm. A common intermediate host for trematodes, remember trematodes are the flukes. There's blood flukes, liver flukes, and lung flukes. And remember that the intermediate host that we talked about the most when it came to trematodes was the snail. All right, characteristics of filarial worms. Remember that filarial worms are also roundworms, like Ascaris lumbricoides. But unlike Ascaris, they don't take up residence in the intestines. They like to infect the body's tissues, especially the lymphatics. This is going to include organisms like Wuchereria bancrofti and the Loa Loa worm. And recall that Wuchereria bancrofti is the causative agent of elephantiasis. Now, what do I want you to know about these worms? I want you to remember that they're animals, so they're multicellular. They have complete digestive tracts, and they also have reproductive organs. Okay, parvovirus characteristics. So remember that parvoviruses are kind of weird in that they are single-stranded DNA viruses. They cause a childhood illness known as fifth disease or erythema infectiosum. They can cause disease in other mammals, such as dogs and cats. And parvovirus can be transmitted across the placenta, resulting in severe infection in the fetus. This can result in conditions like hydrops fetalis and in fetal death. What is the causative agent of roseola? Well, you may recall, this is going to be human herpes virus 6. And remember that human herpes virus 7 also can cause roseola. Which virus likely plays a role in development of multiple sclerosis? Well, we said this is going to be the Epstein-Barr virus, and it increases the likelihood of developing MS more than 30-fold. What is viral classification based on? Well, remember that we're going to classify viruses based on the type of nucleic acid, so RNA or DNA. We classify viruses based on the type of capsid that they have and whether or not an envelope is present. We do not classify viruses based on their metabolism because viruses do not have a metabolism. Right, know the characteristics of smallpox. What do I want you to know about smallpox? Well, I want you to remember that the last naturally occurring case was in 1977. We do have an effective vaccine. That's the whole reason why we don't see smallpox anymore, is because we eradicated it through vaccination. The vaccine itself is effective even if given in the first few days after exposure. So vaccine after exposure is effective. The etiologic agent here, or the causative agent, is variola. And smallpox is going to be transmitted primarily through respiratory droplets, but also contact with the lesions. Know the characteristics of herpes simplex 2. So what I want you to know is herpes simplex 2 can cause herpetic whitlow. Remember, that's a herpetic infection of the finger. It can cause severe infection in neonates that are exposed usually through lesions in the birth canal. The lesions are intensely sensitive vesicles, usually on or near the genitals, because this is HSV2, right? So it's primarily associated with genital herpes. And some of the other symptoms that can occur are urethritis, cervicitis, and itching. Okay, what is a serious complication of infection with HSV-1? Recall that HSV-1 is the primary causative agent of oral herpes. And because it hangs out in the cranial nerves, there is always a chance that it can spread to the brain and cause a very serious encephalitis. Okay, if a person who has never been infected with the varicella zoster virus comes in contact with a person who has shingles, what will happen? Well, remember that varicella zoster is the causative agent of both chickenpox and shingles. So if a person has never been exposed to this virus, and they are exposed to it through someone who has shingles, they can develop the primary infection, which is chickenpox. Recall that they will not develop shingles initially, because shingles is what occurs when the varicella zoster virus becomes latent and years later can reactivate and cause lesions on the skin. Hey, what is the definition of hepatitis? I gave you a very specific definition that I want you to know for the test. So it's going to be inflammation of the liver with necrosis or death of the hepatocytes or the liver cells, and swelling due to a mononuclear response. Remember, that's when the macrophages kind of rush into the liver and cause it to swell. Hepatitis B increases the risk of developing hepatocellular carcinoma or liver cancer. Are warts usually cancerous? Remember, this has to do with human papillomavirus, the causative agent of warts, and also a primary causative agent of cervical cancer. And so there's over 100 strains of HPV, but the ones that cause warts are not usually cancerous. Okay, the characteristics of fifth disease. I want you to know the causative agent here, parvovirus B19. I want you to know that this pathogen can cross the placenta. I want you to know that there is a risk for severe anemia, and especially in immunodeficient children, because this virus destroys the precursors to red blood cells. And I want you to know that fifth disease is a childhood febrile disease with a slapped cheek rash. Generally speaking, DNA viruses are going to replicate in the nucleus. This makes sense, remember, because the nucleus has the machinery inside of it to replicate DNA. So DNA viruses have to travel to the nucleus to find that machinery. On the other hand, RNA viruses don't have to travel too far because the machinery to replicate RNA is already in the cytoplasm. So DNA viruses are generally going to replicate in the nucleus. Remember, there are exceptions, and RNA viruses are generally going to replicate in the cytoplasm. Again, there are exceptions. All right, I want you to know the characteristics of coronaviruses. So these are RNA viruses. They are common animal viruses. You can see them in pigs, dogs, cats, and poultry. There are 4 types that cause nothing more than the common cold. And then there are 3 other types of coronavirus. One type causes SARS, another type causes MERS, and then of course SARS-CoV-2 causes COVID-19. Know the mode of transmission for the following diseases: mumps, influenza, SARS, rubella, and dengue fever. I'm going to save you a little bit of time and let you know that all of these are respiratory, through respiratory droplets, except dengue. which involves a mosquito vector. Which disease features Koplik's spots? Remember, these are spots inside of the mouth. They are pathognomonic for one disease. And what pathognomonic means is that you only see these with one particular disease, and that disease is measles. Okay, what do I want you to know about measles in particular? I want you to know that we are the only reservoir. I want you to know the symptoms: cough, runny nose, fever, conjunctivitis, and of course the rash. I want you to know that secondary bacterial infections are common, especially otitis media and sinusitis. And this is because the measles virus depletes lymphocytes, so our immune response is weakened. I want you to remember that measles can cause a fatal complication called subacute sclerosing panencephalitis. Remember, this is involves the brain. And then I want you to know that it's transmitted through respiratory aerosols. All right, what do I want you to know about rubella? Well, remember, it's going to be caused by the rubivirus. This is a single-stranded RNA virus. Rubella is also called German measles. It's going to be transmitted primarily through respiratory secretions, and there's going to be two clinical forms of rubella, postnatal and congenital. So rubella can cause congenital anomalies in the fetus. This is true. Congenital rubella infection can cause deafness, cardiac abnormalities, mental defects, and ultimately it can also cause miscarriage. How are arboviruses transmitted? Well, like the name suggests, all arboviruses are going to be transmitted through an arthropod vector. You'll need to be able to identify the hemorrhagic fevers, and the two that we talk about are yellow fever and dengue fever. How is HIV transmitted? The main way that HIV is going to be transmitted is through unprotected sexual contact and through blood or blood products. I want you to know the characteristics of the MMR vaccine. So this is for measles, mumps, and rubella. It's a live attenuated vaccine, so it contains a live attenuated virus. It's given in early childhood, and it's given in 2 doses. Complications of COVID-19. Well, remember, some of the complications we talk about are going to be multi-system inflammatory syndrome. This is a rare but serious condition in which the heart, lungs, the kidneys, the brain, the eyes, the GI tract, and even the skin can become inflamed. This tends to affect children more than adults, but it can affect adults. We also talk about long COVID, and that's going to involve fatigue, memory problems, shortness of breath, and sleep disorders. All right, AIDS-defining illnesses. So I want you to be familiar with these guys. Now recall, there's a couple of different ways that we can define AIDS. The most classic way is going to be a CD4 T cell count below 200. But if your CD4 T cells fall below 14% of total lymphocytes, that can also qualify you as having AIDS. And so can some very strange diseases. And these strange diseases are called AIDS-defining illnesses. So we see an AIDS-defining illness here might be cytomegalovirus retinitis. Kaposi's sarcoma, caused by human herpes virus 8, is an AIDS-defining illness. Progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy, toxoplasmosis of the brain, candidiasis of the trachea, the bronchi, or the lungs. These are unusual places to get yeast infections. Histoplasmosis is an AIDS-defining illness. Candidiasis of the esophagus or the GI tract. Again, unusual place to have yeast infections. Herpes simplex chronic ulcers and invasive cervical carcinoma are other examples of AIDS-defining illnesses. So be familiar with these. Okay, the characteristics of RSV. What do I want you to know here? I want you to know that this can cause serious illness in children under 6 months of age. It's going to use the nasopharynx as the main replication site. We can treat it with the antiviral ribavirin, and it gets its name because it forms these things called syncytia, which are multinucleated giant cells. And what happens is RSV causes infected cells to fuse together to form these giant cells, or syncytia. And the problem with that is that they lose their ability to function normally. Finally, I want you to know the characteristics of rabies. So remember, this is a zoonotic disease. It's transmitted to us through animals, and it typically is going to involve bites and scratches, but it can also involve inhalation of droplets. Wild mammals are going to be the primary reservoirs for this virus, and symptoms are going to include agitation, hydrophobia, seizures, and paralysis. And pay very close attention to this incubation period here. Note that it takes weeks or months for the disease to present itself after exposure. Okay, that covers all the material that you need to know for exam number 4. Go through here, study these notes, go back through the PowerPoints and the lectures if you need to refresh on some of these points. There will not be any surprises on this exam. So as long as you study these materials, you should do very well.